There's a kind of pain that only shows up when everything's going well. It's strange, it's quiet, and it slips in slowly, like it doesn't want to be noticed. But then it grows until you feel this urge to give up, and you don't even know why. You ever felt that? Like you don't deserve your own happiness? Like you can't trust the calm? Like if everything's going right, the fall must be close. So before life can bring you down, you bring yourself down first. It's like some part of you once learned that too much love hurts, that too much joy invites punishment, that too much peace isn't safe. And so you start pulling the thread that unravels everything, right at the moment when life finally seemed in place. But the truth is, there's an old pain asking to be felt. It doesn't want to ruin your life. It just wants to be brought out of the dark. And sometimes, what we call self-destruction is just the soul trying to come home. Hi, I'm Noah. This video isn't some big Hollywood production. It's just a way I found to share with you what I learned about myself today through what I've been learning from Carl Jung. Because maybe the moment I'm living through feels a lot like something you're living too. So if something I say here helps you feel a little less alone, just give it a like and subscribe to the channel. That way, YouTube understands that this kind of content matters to you, and it'll start showing you more of it. Sometimes, everything seems fine. You look around and everything's in place. The job is steady, the bills are paid, your body doesn't ache, your relationships feel solid. But then something starts pulling you down, a weight in your chest that doesn't match the moment, a sadness with no clear reason. And you try to ignore it. You keep up the routine, stay focused, push your feelings aside. But that gets exhausting too, because deep down, you know, something inside is trying to speak. And it won't go away just because you pretend not to hear. Sometimes what sabotages you isn't what's missing, it's what's overflowing. Too much control, fear of falling, the pressure to always be okay. You try so hard to keep everything working that you forget to feel what's off script. And then your body screams, your mood shifts, your energy disappears. It's like part of you is trapped in a dark place, begging to be felt. And when you ignore it, it finds a way to show up. Not to ruin you, but to remind you you're still fragmented. Self-sabotage in moments like these isn't a mistake. It's a message. It reveals a hidden psychic conflict beneath your stable surface. It's like your ego saying, everything's fine, keep going. But another part of you, older, deeper, whispering, no, it's not. You forgot me. And that tension between the face you show the world and what you're repressing inside, it splits you quietly, like a shattered mirror between your image and your essence. That force pulling you down isn't punishment. It's the psyche's symbolic function. Jungian psychology calls this the individuation process, when the rejected parts of you start asking for a place in your awareness. It's like your unconscious saying, stop living with only half of who you are. And as terrifying as the fall feels, it might actually be a passage, an invitation to reclaim what's been hidden in your psychological depths, buried in fear, shame, or forgetfulness. Maybe you've never stopped to listen to what that silent pain is trying to say. Maybe you've gotten used to defining yourself by what works, what's proud, what pleases. But no one is whole in only light. And when you try to be only light, your shadow shows up, not as an enemy, but as truth. That unconscious drive to self-destruct often comes from repressed emotions you didn't know how to hold, things you felt but never accepted. And this doesn't heal through effort. It heals through listening. You're not sabotaging yourself because you're weak or ungrateful. You're sabotaging because there are parts of you that were never allowed to exist in peace. And now that life has calmed down, they finally have room to surface. The pain only appeared because now there's space to feel it. It only rose because the chaos no longer distracts you. And as strange as it sounds, that's a sign of healing. A sign that maybe, for the first time, you're ready to hear what you once could only silence. So before you judge yourself, try being quiet. Quiet enough to hear what's asking to be seen. Quiet enough to feel what's been frozen inside. Quiet enough to let your shadow speak, without fear, without filters, without rush. Because in the end, what's pulling you down might be exactly what brings you back to yourself. Whole, human, and finally, at peace with your own darkness. There are parts of you that never had a chance to exist. Feelings you silenced early on. Thoughts you learned to hide. Desires you were taught to be ashamed of. And even though life kept moving forward, those parts stayed behind. Quiet. Forgotten. Trapped inside you like they didn't deserve to breathe. But over time, they come back. Not as monsters, but as living memories. Not as weakness, but as a plea to be present. Because even what's been denied still wants to live. You don't sabotage yourself because you're bad. You sabotage because parts of you are too suffocated to stay invisible. Parts that were taught to hide, that were told they weren't good enough, pretty enough, strong enough. And to survive, you buried all of it. Pretended you didn't feel, didn't hurt, didn't care. But the psyche has its own language, and what's silenced too hard eventually finds a way to scream. Self-sabotage, more often than not, is that scream. A symbolic cry from what's been forgotten inside you. Your personal shadow, like Carl Jung said, isn't made of evil. It's made of everything you repressed out of fear, shame, or not fitting in. And when it rises, it's not because you're weak. It's because something in you is trying to come alive again. A part of you is tired of living behind the mask the world agreed to love. It takes courage to face your shadow without fear. Courage to welcome what you once learned to hate in yourself. Sometimes it's a way of feeling. Other times, it's a part of your body, an old anger, a desire you were never allowed to have. All of that gets stuck, wrapped in layers of guilt until it starts leaking out. It's not drama, it's unconscious expression. It's your soul trying to free itself from the cages your ego built to seem strong. Maybe you've never realized your sabotage is just your shadow trying to breathe. That your fear of opening up, your urge to quit when things go well, that deep sense that this isn't for me, maybe none of it is true. Maybe they're just ghosts of what you couldn't be. Disowned parts of you trying to come back to the center of your life. Because you can't live with only the visible half of your soul. And you don't need to figure it all out today. You don't even have to force change. But maybe you can start listening. Listening to what comes from inside. What pulses in the pauses, what hides in the patterns. Because your shadow, even when quiet, is always speaking. And when it speaks, it's not here to punish you. It just wants to be seen, to be felt, to be treated with the same dignity you've learned to give the parts of you that earn applause. And if you start looking gently at what you were taught to hide, you might find that self-sabotage was just a request from your unconscious for you to finally become whole. A request for what's repressed to have a life too. Because living also means this, making room for what no one taught you how to love. And if you feel like going a little deeper, I carefully prepared a gift for you. It may look small on the outside, but it goes deep. It was made for those quiet moments when you suddenly notice you're here, but not really present. You're breathing, but not really alive. Inside, you won't find answers or fixes, but you might find a way back. Back to the parts of you that got left behind. Back to the gentle voice you stopped listening to. Back to your true self. The one that still remembers who you are. Not a better version of yourself. Not a new version of yourself. Just a whole version of yourself. You'll find the link to your gift right there in the pinned comment. So, if your soul is tired of moving through life without really feeling it, if your soul is tired of waking up and not knowing why, click the link now. There's a strange thing that no one really talks about, but it lives inside many people: the fear of being happy. It sounds illogical, but it's real. Sometimes, when things start going well, you don't feel relief. You feel anxiety. When someone loves you, you shrink. When something good happens, you brace yourself for something bad. And it's not because you want to suffer. It's because somewhere along the way, you learned that joy comes at a cost, and peace always feels like the beginning of loss. There are wounds that showed up too early, at times when you were just learning how to trust. Maybe it was a loss, an absence, constant criticism, or a fear that got under your skin. Without even noticing, you started linking joy with danger, affection with threat, happiness with vulnerability. Your psyche did what it could. It built defenses, built complexes, created ways to survive the pain. But now, every time you get close to the light, your unconscious sets off the alarm. And you run. It's a kind of escape that doesn't look like escape. Sometimes it comes as tiredness, irritation, forgetfulness. Sometimes you start doubting things, picking at flaws, sabotaging what was going well. Other times, you just disconnect, as if you don't belong in the good place, as if joy isn't meant for you. And then comes the guilt, and with it, the shame, as if feeling good were a mistake, as if living in peace were too much of a privilege for someone like you. But it's not a mistake, and it's definitely not selfish. This fear is a form of protection, an old protection built when you couldn't yet make sense of what you felt. And the one who keeps this hidden is your shadow, the part of you that holds the pain you never got to feel. That had to stay quiet so you wouldn't get in the way. That held back tears, anger, longing, just to avoid rejection. And now, every time happiness gets close, it reappears. Not to punish you, but to remind you what never got released. The fear of happiness is often just a reflection of a psyche that never learned how to feel safe. That got used to joy coming with strings attached. That learned love meant abandonment. That smiling meant punishment. And that doesn't go away with pretty words or willpower. It softens through listening, through patience, through the courage to name what's been hiding. Because when your shadow feels heard, it stops attacking and starts trusting. Maybe you grew up thinking you only deserve the bare minimum, that anything beyond that is too much, too risky, too unrealistic. But the truth is, you weren't born to live in a tight little box. You just learned it was safer that way. The good news is, you can unlearn it. You can welcome the shadow that protected you the only way it knew how. You can say to it gently, "It's safe now," because it is. Because today, you're no longer that child. Today, you get to choose not to run. And when you choose to stay, even while trembling, something starts to shift. The pain that once grew where joy should have lived starts to change. And you realize it's not happiness that hurts, it's the absence of it. It's not peace that wounds, it's the memory of war. And slowly, your shadow stops being a threat and starts becoming a bridge between what you were forced to hide and what finally is allowed to live. There are moments when you can't hold the pose anymore, but still, you keep trying to look okay, to be strong, to handle everything with grace. And on the outside, everything seems fine. But inside, there's a kind of exhaustion you can't explain. Like every controlled gesture is hiding a scream. Like the price of balance is too heavy, and it is. Because being perfect is exhausting. But admitting that feels like failure. So you keep going, with a smile on your face and a crack in your soul. From an early age, you were taught to be what others needed. To stay quiet, be good, be smart, be mature. Slowly, you built an ideal version of who you thought you should be. A polished, efficient, admirable image. This is what Carl Jung called the persona, the social mask we wear to survive. But what happens to everything that didn't fit that ideal? What did you do with the mess, the doubts, the sadness that didn't match the image the world rewarded. You hid it, buried it, and now those parts are pulling you down. In this context, self-sabotage isn't weakness. It's a symbolic rupture. It's what Jungian psychology calls the transcendent function, the psyche's way of trying to reconcile inner opposites. Because your ego built a shining mask, but your unconscious holds the pain that mask tries to hide. And when those opposites enter a psychic conflict, something breaks. Not to destroy you, but to reveal you, to remind you that you don't need to be perfect to be whole. You just need to be true. The ego ideal is a prison disguised as success. It promises acceptance, but costs you your vulnerability. And no one can feel whole while silencing essential parts of themselves. That's where shadow work begins, not as a method, but as an act of courage. When the unconscious realizes there's no more room for truth, it reacts, sometimes with anxiety, sometimes with apathy, sometimes with choices that seem irrational, but are actually desperate attempts to reclaim what's been rejected for far too long. Maybe you're afraid of falling apart, afraid to face the parts of you that don't match your polished image. But this is where symbolic transformation begins, not in control, but in surrender to what's real. When you stop pretending, the personal shadow rises, and with it comes the chance to reintegrate, to name what's been repressed, to welcome what's been hidden, and slowly you begin to step out from under the weight of perfection. Perfection makes you fragile because it stops you from being human. It disconnects you from your story, your soul, your relationship with the shadow, and what goes unlived demands attention. It shows up as pain in the body, emotional breakdowns, sudden collapses, not as punishment, but as a calling to let yourself be imperfect, to realize that peace isn't in control, it's in integration. That real strength is born from the courage to be whole, not the illusion of being untouchable. So if you've been sabotaging yourself, maybe it's just your unconscious trying to free you from an ideal that no longer fits. An ideal that's lovely, but way too small for everything you feel. Because the soul, when forced to fit into a mold, begins to suffer. And healing begins the moment you stop fighting who you are, and finally begin to find your way back to yourself. There are things inside you that don't know how to speak, not because they don't want to, but because they haven't found the words yet. That's why sometimes you procrastinate, avoid, lash out, or go quiet. That's why, without really understanding why, you sabotage yourself. It's not weakness, it's too much emotion with nowhere to go. It's your unconscious trying to express itself with the tools it has. And those gestures that look like mistakes are actually a language of the soul, a way to translate a pain that doesn't yet know how to speak. Jungian psychology teaches that the psyche communicates through symbols. And when your conscious mind can't hold what you're feeling, the unconscious finds another way to speak. Through dreams, through the body, through forgetfulness, through impulses. It speaks even through behaviors that seem to make no sense. Self-sabotage is often one of those symbolic channels, an indirect way of saying, there's something inside me that needs to be heard. Something emotional, unspoken, that can only come out through action. It's strange to think of it like this, but the soul has urgency. And when it's been silenced for too long, it finds creative, and sometimes painful, ways to appear. Sometimes in the form of an important slip, sometimes in an impulsive decision, sometimes in that one day where everything was fine and you gave up anyway. It might look like failure, but if you look deeper, it might just be your unconscious trying to speak, trying to break the silence, trying to call you back home. These behaviors you call problems may actually be your way of asking for help, a cry from your personal unconscious, shaped by layers of memory, trauma, and psychological repression. They're built from archetypal patterns, dream symbols, and deeply rooted emotional loops. They're not logical, They're poetic. They're the way the shadow finds to be noticed. Because what's been repressed but still longs to live, screams, and that scream doesn't come with sound. It comes with action. The symbolic language of the soul is subtle. It asks for listening, for stillness. It asks you to look at what you've been doing, not with judgment, but with curiosity. What is this trying to show me? Because every act of sabotage has meaning, even if you can't see it yet. And the unconscious communication doesn't speak in words. It speaks in symbols, in images, in repetition. It speaks when you stop living what you most wanted, when you delay what you most desired, when you pull yourself out of the place you most needed to belong. The problem is, we've been taught to treat all of this as failure, as if feeling too much were a flaw, as if running away were weakness. But the soul only screams in silence because no one ever stayed long enough to really listen. And that listening begins with you. It begins the moment you stop blaming yourself and start asking, what inside me is trying to come alive? What do I need to hold? So this pain can stop screaming through sabotage. Maybe self-sabotage was never about the end. Maybe it was always about the beginning, about a part of you asking to leave the dark, asking to stop being just an impulse and start becoming conscious. And if you find the courage to listen to what your unconscious behavior is trying to say, you might realize that what seemed to push you away from life was actually calling you back. There's pain inside you that didn't start with you, but it lives there. Pain that came from far away, from other times, other voices. Maybe you don't even know its name, but you carry it in your body, in your choices, in fears that feel like yours, but didn't begin with you. These are inherited stories, carried guilt, silent promises passed through generations and placed gently in your chest like an old pact. And without noticing, you keep repeating ancient gestures, like someone trying to finish a grief that was never fully grieved. Sometimes, self-sabotage doesn't come from your mistake. It comes from a family pattern, as if inside you there were echoes of what your parents, your grandparents, your roots couldn't integrate. This is the collective unconscious at work, a part of the collective shadow that you carry, even if you never asked for it, even if you don't know it's there. These are family myths, repeating as patterns. Every time you get close to joy, something crashes. Every time you try to break free, something pulls you back. Every time you start to see yourself, something turns your gaze away. Carl Jung once said that until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct your life, and you'll call it fate. Maybe it's not your fear. Maybe it's the fear of your lineage. Maybe you're living in a cycle that began long before you. And this repetition isn't your fault, but it is an opportunity to break the pattern, to look at what was forgotten, to give a name to what your ancestors couldn't name. Because what's ignored repeats, but what's seen transforms. The unconscious patterns you carry aren't random. They follow a symbolic logic, like internal mandalas trying to guide you back to your center. But for that to happen, you first have to ask, what inside me is acting out of loyalty? What inside me wasn't truly my choice? When you start asking these questions, something begins to open. Because there's no real healing without deep listening to your psyche and to the stories it's been holding in silence. You're not betraying anyone when you break a cycle. You're simply saying, the pain can stop with me. That love doesn't have to mean suffering anymore. That being loyal to your ancestry can also mean setting yourself free. And that might be the bravest act of all. Looking back not to repeat, but to understand. Not to judge, but to transform. Because every family system carries its shadows, but it also carries its light. And maybe, when you listen gently to your psychic inheritance, it stops being a prison and becomes a bridge between what shaped you and what you're finally ready to become. Because the shadow isn't just what you personally repressed, it's also what you were handed without being asked. And integrating all of that is what starts bringing you home, whole, free, and finally able to write a story that is truly your own. There's a part of you that scares you, a part you avoid, hide, and silently condemn. It's your darkest side, the one that feels anger for no reason, wants what it shouldn't, thinks things you'd never say out loud. You try to keep it under control, like a dangerous animal locked in a room. But what you call a monster is often just forgotten pain, a part of you that was never seen with love. And because of that, it learned to scream. Carl Jung said that what you reject most in yourself may hold the key to your inner redemption. Because the monster that haunts you isn't trying to destroy you, it's trying to exist. It wants to be heard through the ears of the soul, with the courage of the heart. That's why symbolic listening matters. When you stop defending yourself from the shadow and start approaching it with curiosity, something shifts. You stop being a hostage to fear and start becoming a companion to your own darkness. That's when inner alchemy begins, when what once felt destructive starts to turn into living matter, when anger becomes a boundary, when envy turns into a real desire, when fear becomes care. The symbolic function of the psyche does this. It transforms what seemed wrong into emotional truth. But it only happens when you're willing to look the monster in the eye, without filters, without running, with empathy. It may sound strange to feel empathy for something that's already hurt you, but what lives in that shadow isn't evil. It's abandonment. And when you choose to listen with presence, without rushing to fix anything, the unconscious begins to understand that it doesn't need to scream anymore. The shadow starts to trust, and when it trusts, it reveals. It shows old desires, wounds that never healed, parts of you that were frozen, waiting for permission to live. That's where shadow integration begins, not as a magical event, but as a deeply human moment. A moment where you recognize, this is also me. And from that recognition, forgiveness is born. Not the kind that erases or excuses, but the kind that says, you have a right to exist. And that kind of acceptance changes everything. It brings back all that was exiled and symbolically leads you back to the self. The monster you feared can become your ally, not because it disappears, but because you learn how to speak with it. You learn how to make space for it, how to listen with respect. And that's what active imagination is, a living bridge between what you feel and what hasn't found words yet. Because in the end, what hurts most isn't what we feel. It's having nowhere to put what we feel. And accepting the shadow is creating that place. So maybe today, all your monster really needs is a look without fear, a look without judgment, a look that says, I see you. Because sometimes healing doesn't start with change. It starts when we stop running. There comes a time when pain gets tired of being just pain, and it begins to turn into something else. It starts to become fire, not a fire that burns on the outside, but one that warms from within. A fire that rises from the shadow, yes, but no longer to destroy. Now it illuminates. The shadow that once sabotaged you now pushes you forward, because when you stop running from it, it stops chasing you, and it starts walking beside you like a living force, a source of creation. That's what Carl Jung saw in the shadow. Not an ending, but a portal. When opposites confront each other with honesty, something new is born. A third thing, a spark between what you show and what you hide. That spark is the beginning of psychic wholeness. It's the moment you realize you don't have to choose between light and darkness, because what's real is born from both. That's what symbolic alchemy teaches. The gold is in the mud, and the fire is at the center of the wound. Pain, when listened to, becomes path. Anger, when held, becomes drive. Shame, when named, becomes truth. Everything that once felt like a flaw begins to reorganize inside you as creative force, as if your own psyche was saying, I just needed space to exist fully. And then, instead of sabotaging yourself, you start to create. Instead of repeating the same cycles, you begin to transform. Because what was once repetition becomes consciousness. Psychological healing isn't about getting rid of what you feel. It's learning how to feel in a new way, a way that doesn't harm, that doesn't sabotage, that doesn't suppress. A way that honors every part of you as part of a journey. And this journey has a name: individuation. It's the symbolic process of becoming who you've always been, but never had room to be. And when this begins, the soul can finally breathe. With lightness, with truth, with fire. You begin to see that you don't need to control everything. You can trust the psychic vitality that comes when you reconcile with what you once tried to erase. And then, something lights up. Not perfection, but presence. A soft lucidity. As if, after so much struggle, you could finally sit beside your shadow and hear life speak from within. Turning the shadow into fire is exactly that. Letting what once hurt become material for creation. No longer wasting your own darkness. Turning it into fertile soil, raw material. Source, because in the end, you're not here to fix yourself. You're here to become whole. And wholeness also burns. And if something I said reminded you of your own story or stirred something inside you, feel free to share it in the comments. I'd really love to hear it. What you have to say matters, not just to me, but maybe to someone else who's going through something similar. Sometimes, putting it into words is already part of the healing. If something inside you still wants to understand yourself, there's another video waiting for you on the screen. And maybe what's in there is exactly what you've been needing to hear. Click it, if that's where your soul is asking to go.